What's up, you guys? Josh Tongla here. Today, I want to talk about this whole pandemic that's happening in our world today with the coronavirus. And I want to give you a perspective that I believe will help empower you at this time. Because there's a lot of unnecessary fear and panic going around that I'm seeing, which ain't cool, you guys. So I thought I'd finally address this topic on my channel. And interestingly enough, this is still part of a series I'm doing on reality transurfing. Because Vadim Zeland actually does address this topic on some level in one of his chapters called Epidemic. And in case you haven't heard, there's an official International Transurfing Institute for the English Language endorsed by Vadim Zeland himself. And it's dope because they recently reached out to me and we've decided to collaborate to help spread this knowledge. And you can find out more about them by clicking on the links below. Now, many of you know that I've been studying and practicing healing for almost 15 years. And I honestly don't believe that you gotta be an expert on viruses to know how to deal with this pandemic. You know what I'm saying? What's more important, in my opinion, is understanding how reality actually works. And if you've been feeling fearful these past couple of months, I'm telling you, dude, once you understand the power of your beliefs, then by the end of this, you're gonna have your power back and see that you have nothing to be afraid of anymore. Cool? All right, let's do this. You see, according to Vadim Zeland, the problem is that a lot of people tend to think that you get ill simply because you've been infected by some sort of bacteria. And you know what? It's true. It's true, and I bet you didn't expect that answer, right? And if so, good, because here's the rest of what he says. People do get sick because they've been infected by some bacteria, but, and listen closely, only so far as they allow themselves to become infected. Let me say that again. Only so far as they allow themselves to become infected. And by this, he doesn't mean that it's because they weren't wearing a protective health mask or anything like that. Nah, dude, in fact, he says that the masks wouldn't even have saved them. For real. So what's really going on then? Okay, let's break this down. Ready? Zeland says that there are actual stages of disease and that the cause of an illness, and you got to get this, folks, is your voluntary agreement to play the game called epidemic. And just to clarify, people tend to confuse epidemic with pandemic and use them interchangeably, when in fact they're different. An epidemic is more local. It's like a start of something, while a pandemic is more widespread, like across continents or the entire world. Still with me? All right, back to the stages. Let's take the flu, for example. It's like this. He says that it all begins with rumors that somewhere there's an epidemic going around. And everyone knows that the flu is transmitted through the respiratory system. And so you, like everyone else, totally accept the possibility that you could come down with something. And then what do? You immediately entertain the idea of being off sick through your mind, where you imagine yourself lying in bed, coughing and sneezing and having a temperature. And from that moment on, he says, you end up playing what he calls the pendulums game. And pendulums, just to keep things simple for now, is like a collective group mind or thought structures that appear when a group of people begin to think in the same way, like a political party or a religion or whatever. Where on an energetic level, these structures can evolve and reach a stage where they begin to have a life of its own and even subject people to their own laws. Now, it's much more than this, but this definition will do for now. So to continue, Zeland says that you end up playing the pendulum's game because your imagination is shaping your thought energy to the same frequency as a destructive pendulum. And then your attention, check this out, becomes selective, where your subconscious starts searching for confirmation of the onset of an epidemic. And all of a sudden, you find yourself surrounded by people sneezing. They were always there, but you just didn't notice them before. Or someone at work or at home, quote unquote, randomly starts talking about the flu. And so your suspicion that an epidemic is coming is therefore confirmed by more and more evidence. Even if you weren't worried about it or even consciously looking for confirmation, somehow, some way, you guys, confirmation still showed up. Why? Because you'll always find negative information if you're looking for it. And here's the thing. Zeland says that if you've attuned yourself to the frequency of the destructive pendulum from the very beginning of the game, that your bond with it will become stronger, regardless of whether your participation is conscious. And so, if you're not against the idea of getting sick, or if you feel that for whatever reason, you're bound to come down with something, well then, Zeland says that you've become an active adherent. On the other hand, if you decide that you can't afford to get sick, and you keep telling yourself how healthy you are, unfortunately, that doesn't work either. Because as I've mentioned so many times in my other videos, which Vadim confirms, that you just thinking about the illness means what? That you're tuning your energy to its frequency. And if that's the case, then thinking positively or negatively about it doesn't even stinking matter. Sure, you can try to say a bunch of positive affirmations to try to stay healthy and all. However, words spoken aloud or to oneself, Zealand says, are, listen, nothing at all in comparison to the inaudible power of faith. Yes, faith. See, without faith, you guys, and I'm talking about real belief and not just mental assent, you won't be able to protect yourself from the flu. Even if you rush to get a flu vaccination, it'll make no difference because you'll always shift to a lifeline that corresponds to what? Your thought energy. Is this making sense? Think about this. Zealand asks, have you ever wondered why doctors aren't infected by their patients? You've seen it. They boldly work without wearing a mask, right? With the exception of what's going on now where it's a requirement for everyone. But in general though, why don't they get infected? And it's not because they've had all the injections, folks. You can't have a vaccine for everything. The answer is doctors are also actively playing the game of the illness pendulum, according to Zealand. But they're playing an entirely different role. Or by analogy, he says, the next time you fly in a plane, notice the stewardesses. What do you see? They're moving up and down the cabin quickly, insistently advising passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Yet, they're so mobile around the cabin. And if anything bad ever happened on the plane, in Zealand's words, they'd simply hover in the air like hummingbirds. Look, if you're still critical about this perspective, it's all good. First off, Vadim is straight up when he says that we're only looking at the phenomenon of epidemic as a general tendency. And secondly, he's not suggesting that the concept of infection is a delusion, or that thought energy radiating at the frequency of illness is a sole cause of ill health. He says transurfing is neither a dogma, nor does it claim to be the final authority on truth. But we can only take into account certain patterns and regularities. And so truth is always quote unquote somewhere close by, he says. But where exactly? No one can say. Alright, real talk. Now, let's be honest here, folks. You rarely hear anything positive in the news. You know what I'm saying? It's mostly negative stuff like people getting murdered, raped, robberies, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, news instilling so much fear into the hearts and minds of people. But remember this, the very moment you react to the negative events and take part in the confusion, it pulls you in like a vortex, he says, and you take on the role of a victim. And as a result, the negative event becomes a part of the layer of your world, plain and simple. So don't absorb and allow negative information into your life, you guys. That doesn't mean you strive to avoid it, because that'll be a mistake too. Rather, it means you just intentionally ignore it. Seriously, express no interest in it. I'm not talking about ignoring the schedules of when stores are open. I'm talking about not giving life to a disease. Switch your attention to something more positive. Because as I mentioned in my last video, when you actively resist and try to avoid something you hate or fear with all your heart, what happens? You end up radiating energy at the frequency of the object you're trying to avoid, which means you'll end up getting the very thing you love to hate, and sometimes in abundance too. So just to bring this to a close, look, if you don't worry about this pandemic, you won't be affected. It's like if you go on a vacation and you haven't spoken to anyone or seen the news at all where you know nothing about the virus. Question, will it affect you? Think about it. Will it affect you? I know some people will say, but Josh, we have no control over this. This is reality. Yo, it doesn't have to be your reality though, right? It doesn't. Folks, your attitude towards life will determine and shape your reality. Fear shuts down the immune system, okay? Fear shuts down the immune system. No more fear, you guys. No more fear. Take your power back and let's speak life to this world, for goodness sake. Look for the good, and I promise you, you'll find an abundance of it. Your world will reflect it because you get what you believe. Yeah. Alrighty guys, I have a live coaching and Q&A session coming up. So if you're interested in that, just click the join button below. And if you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor, like and share it. If you're listening via podcast, I'd really appreciate a review. It gets more people to discover my work and of course help spread this message. And share your thoughts or stories in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and the bell right next to it to be notified of my next video. I pump these out every single week so you don't want to miss them. And don't forget to register for my free online training where I dive deeper into how you can start manifesting the life you really want right now. So check it out. The link's in the description. Like I always say, more's coming. Till next time, I'm out. Peace.